Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 8 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I am your host, Melissa Whitecross, coming to you live from a stormy Johannesburg. We have over 130 episodes recorded and available on YouTube, so if you miss out because of load shedding or your Tuesday nights have gotten busy, never fear, you can always catch up later. Tonight, we are talking all things ground hornbills, these iconic thunderbirds of the African savannas. But now onto tonight's main event, one of our original presenters from the dark days of hard lockdown. I have the privilege of welcoming back Dr. Lucy Kemp to our screens. I think Lucy and I presented together on the 5th of May, 2020. So almost 3 years later, you're back to share some of the incredible work you've achieved with us since then. Lucy's main interest is how to take sound scientific evidence and use that to formulate on-the-ground conservation action that considers socioeconomic realities, cultural sensitivities, and conservation biology. Lucy has been privileged to work on conservation projects both in Namibia and South Africa, which have involved work on black rhino, wild dog, cheetah, high-value plant species, community-based natural resource management, and food security for communities living in national parks. Now, with 12 years of ground hornbill conservation under her belt, she still feels that this flagship species is an excellent candidate for testing conservation tools and connecting people throughout Africa through a common conservation interest and growing love of these iconic birds. Lucy, I can't wait to see what you have to share with us tonight. So I'm going to hand over to you to please share your screen and take it away.
Thanks very much, Melissa. Apologies about my camera, but also I skidded in from the field. We're doing a new reintroduction, and so it's probably better that no one can see me. So let me just get this live. Are you seeing that all right?
Yes, we've got you. Thanks so much, Lucy.
Fantastic. All right, so when we spoke 3 years ago, that was only the Southern Ground-Hornbills, and as yet we hadn't even started thinking about the Northern Ground-Hornbills. So we've started to look across the equator at probably the least studied big bird on the planet, I can imagine. And I've titled my talk Thugs of the South and the Enigma of the North. And it wasn't until I met the Northern Ground-Hornbill or Abyssinian Ground-Hornbill that I realized quite how thug-like our birds are. And I'll get into that a bit later. So our ground hornbills in South Africa, Namibia, possibly also Botswana and Zimbabwe are endangered and sliding to critically endangered. So we've still got a lot of work to do, but based off the work that we did, we were able to uplist the northern ground hornbill, which occurs north of the equator, to at least vulnerable, based on a lot of those same common threats, but not based on a single ounce of data. And so this has kind of been niggling me for a couple of years that we really need to start doing something for this other ground hornbill. And I had an opportunity and managed to get some funding from a number of zoos, mostly in Europe, to start some pilot work on the northern ground hornbill. And that's what I'd like to present as some of my work for this evening. So our birds, I do feel we know them well. We're still learning a lot, but from when my parents started the work in Kruger National Park in 1966, ground hornbills were simply of academic interest. And over the years, more and more projects have started. KwaZulu-Natal in the 80s, then the APNR project started, more work in the KZN, and increasingly, we're moving out of looking at the birds within our sort of formal protected areas and rather looking at where they are in more trouble, which is beyond the borders of protected areas on mixed land use areas and communal grazing grounds. And so that's completely shifted our gaze of how we understand these birds in the landscape and what we need to be thinking about from a conservation point of view. Once we started looking at that, we realized that actually, if we're going to be safeguarding our own birds, we need to be looking across our borders. And so we have now started partnerships with Zimbabwe, Namibia, and now Botswana. And possibly the next one will be Kenya, because that seems to be the next at-risk country for these birds. So what started as academically interesting within my lifespan, I went as a kid to Kruger, standing on the top of the old Land Cruiser to check in nests. That's when the birds were interesting and something cool to study. Over my lifespan, these birds have become really in serious conservation peril, and we're trying to figure out what we can do to turn that around. And the more we cast our gaze away from places like Kruger, we realize that this is actually the natural habitat of the Southern Ground-Hornbill. They live in amongst villages, in amongst cattle, with people, and have done so for millennia. And so as a territorial bird, the only way we're going to be able to do anything for them beyond the borders of protected areas is looking at some sort of custodianship program. And that's what we've initiated, so that each group is protected by the people that it shares its land with. And so this is one of the approaches that we've taken for our birds that's starting to bear fruit. This is what we've got. The blue shows the historic range, and this is all literature references. So this isn't anecdotal, this is stuff published in the literature. And you can see that the birds occur all the way to southern Kenya, but they used to occur much more widely across Limpopo, all the way down to Alexandria in the Eastern Cape. And the yellow blocks is pretty much all we've got left. So you can see that Kruger is at capacity just about, and you can basically see the borders of a protected area. And that indicates very clearly to us that we are unfortunately the problem for the species. And so our focus has shifted from Kruger into these other areas, southern KZN, and hopefully by the end of this year moving into the Eastern Cape, where we still need to do a lot of work to ground truth whether this is indeed the actual distribution, or if those birds really are in as much danger as it looks from that map. But we've been working at this for a long time with a huge number of collaborators. What I'm presenting tonight is on behalf of a large number of collaborators. And we've been through multiple stakeholder conservation planning processes, trying to figure out what is it that we need to do for these birds. And with each iteration, I think these plans get much stronger. And I'm thrilled to say that the Biodiversity Management Plan was accepted by Government's Working Group 1, so is now sitting with the Minister for Gazetting. So after 3 years, we finally over that hurdle, and now we're just waiting for the minister to sign. And that means that finally ground hornbills are going to be seen as a line item for budget, which is a good thing, but also it's taken it beyond the realm of what NGOs and academics can do, and is making this somebody's problem, somebody's job description for the first time in this long ground hornbill story of ours. I have an amazing team behind me. Many of them are new to the team, so we've got a lot of fresh new energy and skills and expertise coming into the team. And we work with the greater Southern Ground-Hornbill group, with the APNR project, and with a number of other collaborators across the country. So everything we do is absolutely always a collaboration and a partnership. And so we've kind of refined over the years that our mission is to try and slow and reverse the decline of the ground hornbill, and try and improve its conservation status. Ideally, if we get it right, we can all resign and go off and do something else with our lives. And we've kind of narrowed this down to we need to secure what we've got. We've got to restore through whatever means possible where we've lost them. And in the areas where they're not protected, we need to try and remove and significantly reduce all the threats that they face. So that pretty much encapsulates our big long-term goals for the project. And everything that we've learned a lot of it has been trial and error. There's no textbook for this. And we have, this project now has 20 years of experience, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And so what we're trying to do now is ensure that no one else has to make those mistakes. Make sure that we're able to share tested conservation actions with all of our neighboring range states, but also help formulate conservation plans with the knowledge that we have of the species. So Zimbabwe, we started in 2019. We had the first workshop, really just trying to pull together what information was available, what the likely threats were, and part of that is expanding the citizen science WhatsApp group network that we have. And you can see on the right-hand side some of our Kariba sightings coming in. And so what we need to do now is go back, now that we've got these sighting records, assess what Zimbabwe has and where to put the effort in. Is it going to be artificial nests? Is it going to be a lot of education? Is it going to be, are they going to tackle reintroduction? So the first step for them was, what do we have? And these WhatsApp groups are bearing amazing fruit. I think there's 15 groups in Zimbabwe now. They run in collaboration with BirdLife Zimbabwe, and yeah, we're getting great data in, but we need to expand that. So if you know of any people in Zim in areas where they aren't on one of these reporting groups, please do drop us a line. The same for Namibia, but I approached it slightly differently this time. I am an IUCN Conservation Planning Specialist Group facilitator, and the more I've been thinking about it, the more I feel that we're including our communities as an afterthought in a lot of the action plans, species action plans that we undertake. And so what I tried to do on this was include as many community members in the areas where these birds occur. So we took 6 weeks to work across the range in Namibia, stopping at multiple communities, and had multiple workshops along the way so that I could take the voices of those communities to the big conservation planning workshop that was held in Katima. And I was blown away at the quality of the conservation plan that came from this. And it also showed really clearly that the people who share the ground with these birds are the ones who fully understand what the problems are. And if you don't include them in your conservation planning, you run a really big risk of not fully understanding what the issues are on the ground. And so now that their conservation plan is up and running, we've been able to secure some funding, and 2 of my team are up in Caprivi at the moment, and that's one of the nests that went up yesterday, which is really exciting, just on the Angola border. And so, we're starting to form a much tighter partnership there, and hopefully we can do as much as we can to secure those birds. We've also done a conservation planning workshop for Botswana, and so that's what I'm busy finalizing, that document, and then hopefully we can take that on right from the planning stage into implementation. So we only really have Mozambique now, and we've managed to secure all of our neighboring range states. And along the way, we've come up with, I think, some really fun ways of communicating the issues for ground hornbills, and I'd like to share one of those with you now.
In a small village, there lived a clever little girl called Knowledge. One night, as her grandfather said goodnight, she asked him why the rains had not come. The grandfather said that many years ago, there were these giant birds called the Ground-Hornbill, also known as the thunder or rain birds, that had a magnificent call that would often be followed by good rain. But he hadn't seen one in many years. Maybe that is why there was no rain. The young girl fell into a deep sleep and was startled by a loud sound. It was the Ground-Hornbill. The giant bird greeted her by name and asked if she could help him. He would return to the village to call for the rains. As the 2 of them walked, the giant thunderbirds at most of the trees they nested in had been cut down, forcing them to leave. He said that they only needed 1 tree per family. The little girl said that she would ask the villagers to protect those specific trees. "Thank you," said the bird. The few that had stayed only had strange-looking trees to roost on. The giant bird pointed to an electricity post. But these trees had often hurt or electrocuted them, forcing their families to leave too. As they continued, Knowledge jumped with fright as she saw a large puff adder on the track. But the bird marched past her and with 1 step to its head killed it and then ate it. She was so grateful as snakes terrified her and her family. The giant bird pointed at a dead rat lying in a field and was about to eat it when the little girl said, "No, it was probably poisoned and it would kill him if he ate it." Some farmers still use poison to keep predators or rats away from their livestock or food. The little girl said she would discuss alternatives with her village, like good kraals, herd dogs or cats to keep away predators and rats. "Thank you," said the bird, as he hopped excitedly along. The bird then walked past a window and immediately began to attack it. The little girl quickly covered the window with a blanket, and he instantly stopped. "Why did you do that?" she asked. The bird said he had seen another ground-hornbill in the window and needed to defend his territory, nest, and wife. While chuckling to herself, she covered some of the lower windows so he would not break them. As they passed a particular house, he pointed and said some men from that house had tried to catch and kill him, believing that if they did, they would steal his great voice and make themselves more powerful. The little girl thought for a moment and said that the voice of one man is not as important as the voice of a bird that brings the rain and can eat dangerous snakes. "I will tell my people of all these dangers you face. I think we can make our village safe for you to return. And hopefully, if you are happy and safe, also call the rain." The bird began to flap excitedly and called loudly. The sound of thunder echoed through the air, and the little girl smiled. She promised the ground-hornbill that she would share all she had learned with her people when she awoke. "I think they will listen. After all, her name was Knowledge."
So we're looking for different ways to share the messaging, to try and reach as many language groups in South Africa, with the ultimate goal that we can end up with something like this Keiskamma Arts Trust tapestry, where people and hornbills live in harmony together. But that takes us on to a completely different beast, which I call the enigma of the north, the northern ground hornbill. Traditionally, the heads of these birds, you can see that's a photograph from Chad, were used for hunting antelope. So these elaborate headgears were made from the skulls of these birds, and the hunters would crawl through the grass until they got close enough to their prey to be able to catch a small antelope this way. And so these birds have also been an integral part of people's lives across that entire region as well. And yet, there's not a single scientific paper that helps us understand the biology of the species. There's papers like this, proverbs associated with the call and social interactions, which are amazing and really show how strongly connected people are to these birds. But our ultimate goal is to start trying to formulate a conservation action plan for these birds as well, because I suspect that they're probably worse off than ours, because they face many of the same threats that our birds do, but they have the additional issue of live trade to zoos we don't know where. We're just starting to get a lot more information coming in of these birds going into being captured and kept in horrific conditions, up to 30, 40 birds at a time. And so what we need is the science backing to be able to formulate a really strong conservation action plan across that entire range. So we know very little about the northerns and how they compare to the southerns, because we'd love to be able to take the lessons that we've learned from the southerns and apply them to the northerns if that's possible. So we do know they breed much younger than ours. We do know that we can age them only until the age of 3, whereas ours we can age them up to the age of 6. We learned on that field trip to Ghana that our birds are viciously territorial compared to theirs. We may not have been in the right season, but when we do call-ups with ours, the birds respond quite ferociously. Whereas there was some mild bill clacking. It was almost like a tea party. Hi, nice to see you, what's going on? And off they went. I've never seen a territorial interaction like that. So there's something very different happening in the interactions between groups. We know that ours have an alpha pair and multiple male helpers. We haven't found anything that looks like normal in the northerns. There are multiple combinations that we've encountered through citizen science, through photographs online, but we can't seem to come up with what a normal northern ground hornbill family group looks like. We do know they're both fornivorous, that they catch and eat whole play. We have, from our time in Ghana, their morning duet call is much, much shorter than ours. And that the fledglings, their white primaries, look the same as ours. And so there's very little actually to go on at the moment, and certainly not enough to put together a conservation action plan. We've started doing some spatial analysis with all the citizen science data available, and this is working with Paul Robinson. And what is quite alarming, and we're very fresh into this work, is the birds are extinct in 3 countries already: Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Mali. There's not a single record to be found. We've been in contact with birders who go through these areas. So if anyone has any data on northern ground hornbills, we would, if you've seen them anywhere, we would love to know where, because there is not a lot of data to work off at the moment. And so we're trying to then, with these data gaps, work with local BirdLife partners to try and figure out, through their networks, if we can try and close some of these gaps. And these are the BirdLife partners that we're working with across this range. In terms of the genome, there's a student at WITS, Jasmine Patel, who's taken this on. So we're looking at northern and southern, and we're now in the process of assessing 6 southern ground hornbill genomes so that we can, for once and for all, seal the deal on what's happening with the genes of the southerns. But we're also doing a comparative study between the southerns and the northerns. So at least we'll have that baseline to work off as we go forward. So Jasmine's doing amazing work, and I can't wait to see the results from this. We're in the process of registering a project with African parks, which will allow us monitoring data from these African parks across the range. Here's a group that's been reported, and there's males, females, multiple of each, and it just doesn't reflect anything that we know as ground hornbills. So it's just been fascinating to meet this other ground hornbill and try and wrap our heads around it. I have a PhD student now in Ghana, Selassie. He did his master's looking at distribution and abundance of hornbills in forest landscapes in southern Ghana. So he's already done a lot of hornbill work. And he's working together with an MSc student, Shine, who's going to be looking at the distribution data within Ghana and trying to get as many DNA samples as he can as well to see what's going on there. And so we launched the Abyssinian Ground Hornbill Project. What's interesting is we always refer to them as the Northern Ground Hornbill, but once you start working in the region, everyone there calls them the Abyssinian. So we're just sticking with what works locally. So that's Shine on the left, Shine on the right, and Selassie on the left, and one of our decoys that we had made to start trying to understand these birds. So we finally have a ground team in Ghana. It took us a year to raise the funds for a vehicle, so those guys have been a bit grounded, but this is the new vehicle that's out and about. They're in the field at the moment. And we're using a lot of citizen science, trying to emulate what we've been doing for the southern. And that data is starting to flow in. So that's in collaboration with NUST University and with their Forestry Commission and Wildlife Division there, and then also with the zoos in Europe strongly funding this project. So that's been really amazing to have them come on board, not just in terms of funding, but also sharing photos of their birds so that we can start trying to put together what these birds look like at different ages, sort of an ID kit like we have for the southerns to enable the guys on the field to get much better data. So Mole National Park is quite an interesting place. It was only formulated as a park about 30 years ago. And what we have found in Mole in the 2.5 years that we've been going now is not a single juvenile, not one. So that's engaging with the local rangers. They don't know of a single nest. And most of our parks, if you go in and speak to the rangers, they can point you in the direction of a nest or two. So we don't know if perhaps all the big trees were logged before this area became a national park, or if there's something else going on in this area. Because this is all we found: pair after pair after pair, adults, adults, adults. We found a few other strange combinations, like 4 females together. We found 2 males together, 3 females and 1 male, 2 males. You know, so the combinations just kept coming, but not a single juvenile did we find in our time there. So we found 25 different groups or pairs. So technically Mole should have 485, but as I said, there's a caveat of assumptions there. You know, we've a myriad of assumptions. It's really hard to get into the park, but the team on the ground now has been speaking to rangers, some who've been there since the formation of the park, and they don't know if they've ever seen a juvenile. So what it looks like at this stage, and I'm hoping we're wrong, but it looks like this is an entirely adult population with no recruitment. Because these birds live so long, you know, these birds could have last bred 40 years ago. So we're desperately hoping we're wrong, but this is what it looks like at the moment. And within Ghana itself, this is the only last remnant population of these birds. So certainly for the students, it's led to a number of beautiful questions. Why are there no juveniles? What on earth is happening in those social structures? What is a normal northern ground hornbill social structure? What kind of nests or trees do they use? Are there any nests? Where are they? What do they look like? Is it because of the logging? There's quite a serious burning regime in that park. So is that something to do with the burning regime? So the students have got a lot cut out for them to try and get to the bottom of this. But, you know, if you're a student, these are indeed beautiful and critical questions to get to grips with. So they're out there in their new vehicle fighting the tsetse flies on behalf of the Northerns. What we're trying to do is now get as many similar projects up and running across the range. So Ngoni Diop is a postdoc in Senegal. So she's taking the lead on this now for Senegal. And we've managed to secure funding for both her and the Ghanaian project through Indianapolis Zoo, for which we are eternally grateful. We're setting up collaborations in Nigeria, Benin, Guinea, and Ethiopia. We formed an Abyssinian ground hornbill working group so that we can try and put everyone in touch with each other. So we're information sharing from the get-go, and that we're trying to make sure that the research that we're doing is comparable. And we want to make sure that we're using the same methodologies so that we can compare across the range what is going on and what do we need to do for these birds, so that ultimately we can put together that conservation action plan. One cool thing I've found is the Senegalese singer Youssou N'Dour has a song about the northern ground hornbills, and Ngoni's mom is busy translating the old Wolof to let me know what the lyrics for that are. And so I'm just loving finding how deeply embedded these birds are in the culture of Northern Africa. And so essentially, as always, this is a cry for sightings from anywhere you go. We really need you to help us to help them. This is a video that makes me laugh eternally from the APNR project, and just shows you how much they really need us. And that video lives rent-free in my head forever. So show your ground hornbill love in any way you can. This is a German conservation intern who's been working with us recently. She fell in love with the bird so deeply that she took that tattoo home with her. And so in any which way, but for us, sightings is critical. And I'd like to thank you for your time, love, and support of these birds. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you so much. What a phenomenal presentation, as always. You are an absolute star and one of Africa's champion conservationists. I see the hundreds of little hearts and thumbs up flying through there. So I think our audience really thoroughly enjoyed that. And as you were finishing off your presentation there, I just had the biggest clap of thunder go over my house. So I think your Thunderbird videos are working.
Cool, that's amazing. I just have to, I see there's one from George Branch, who was my honors and masters supervisor. George, I'm doing this in public. Love you to the ends of the earth and back.
Wonderful. Yeah, not so secret admirer there, I see. And, so much praise in the chat box, and I think a very useful comment from our partner and colleague Ian Barber, who works for the RSPB, saying that the RSPB has several BirdLife partners throughout that West African region. So he's happy for you to get in touch and keep spreading that sort of BirdLife network and leveraging anyone they've got access to. So thanks, Ian, for that.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And yeah, I realize I don't know how to fit both species into one presentation, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Absolutely. I think we'll start off with one from Penny Abbott. So Penny was saying, we obviously know a lot about the cultural significance here in South Africa. And you mentioned one or two of the elements around the northern birds in terms of hunters using them as headdresses and that sort of thing. But how much more is there to learn about the cultural significance? And have you had any tastes beyond that kind of hunter value for the birds?
So for Southern Africa, we've had a master's student and a PhD student working on the cultural stuff, because it's something that comes up very often. It's a common narrative, but basically the data shows that they are used for medicinal and ritual purposes very, very rarely. So I think we can finally dispel that. They're culturally important, so they are used occasionally, and it is that cultural importance which is keeping them safe in a lot of our areas. But I think we can finally dispel that. It's nothing like pangolins or vultures or anything. It's probably hunters taking juveniles opportunistically. Stupid youngster doesn't get away from the dogs. You've got it. What do? It may as well go to market. So a single carcass can be at the same market stall for 3 to 4 years with nothing new coming in. So I think the cultural importance in terms of conservation far outweighs any of the offtake, and it's wonderful to have that coming through. And Patience is writing up her master's now, and there's just some of the most beautiful stories coming out. In Venda, ground hornbills are the bird of peace, so you can pack your white dove away. Because ground hornbills are really, really significant for that. So there's that. For the northerns, we don't know a lot. That hunting thing is quite a historic thing. We haven't had any recent comments on that. For us, much more worrying is the trade going on in West Africa. This live trade of these big consignments of northerns going out, and we don't know where. Probably China, probably the Middle East, but we're working hard on the ground to try and track those trade routes.
Absolutely, thanks, Lucy. Yeah, and I think Paul Buckley here says absolutely loved the short film, as did I. And obviously for the northern species, do you think the concentration of records in Senegal and Ethiopia is reflective of their status, or just purely about where they're being seen? For example, not many birds coming out of Chad.
We have exactly no idea. So that's the thing. We have so little data that we're sure of for these birds, and it's just crazy for a bird that size that we have so little to work from. So these students and Ngoni and the rest are going to be doing really groundbreaking stuff. It's the very first. It's what my parents were doing in 1966. What do they eat? Where do they breed? How many eggs? How long do they incubate? We're really going back to basics here.
Oh, well, what a fantastic teacher to be able to tap into for them. They're very lucky working off of your experiences and your family's legacy as well. George Branch has put a question here asking, do you think artificial trees would work to assist the nesting? I know you briefly touched on your nest boxes, but what about artificial trees?
George, trees are harder to build than nests. So the nests are, yes, but I think the nests, so we build what look like dinosaur eggs, and the birds really take to them. We put up a new one in Salati Game Reserve, and within 2 weeks that group had laid, and they fledged successfully this year. What we're not comfortable with is those nests are not going to be good enough in a warming climate, so we're constantly working to get these nests right. There's the Hot Bird Project, and I would like us to be known as the Cold Nest Project, but we're not there yet. So this is something we're working on constantly. The nests that have gone up in Namibia are our best current, but we still, we're back to the drawing board in July.
Thanks, Luce. And I know you sort of briefly touched on some of the reintroduction work that you and the Mabula team have been involved in for many, many years. We've got a question here from Helen Olive asking, are there any plans to reintroduce into Eswatini, for example, perhaps working with big game parks to do such an activity?
So currently I have a master's student working in, she's a Swati student, co-supervised with Ara. So she is looking at the feasibility of whether it's even possible. The problem with Swaziland is it seems that a lot of those birds went out for live trade and body parts. You know, there've been consignments of Boeings, you know, they've been in big trade consignments leaving the country. And so obviously reintroductions, you want to make sure that the place is safe before you put them out. So the answer is I don't know yet. Belinda is busy tackling that. And you know, so we are looking at that. There's one nest in Eswatini. They're basically locally extinct there. So what we're trying to do now is we're buffering. We're going to start doing reintroductions in northern Zululand, so we can join southern Kruger. So try and bring the populations of northern Zululand and southern Kruger as close as possible, so that we get, you know, better chance of gene flow. But ideally, we need Swaziland to be restored to get that gene flow right.
Thanks, Luce. And we've also got a question here asking how important it is to report sightings in Kruger National Park, for example, where we know we're hopefully getting lots of data in.
We are getting lots of data in, but every single point is valuable. So please don't feel that just because you've seen the same group in the same place 3 days in a row, that's useful to us. So yes, please. Awesome.
Thanks, Marlene, for that question. And I 100% agree. I think, Lucy, in your previous talk, you showed your fantastic monitoring system with the sort of grid cell method where you're keeping track of all your different flux. So as you said, get that data coming in and help them keep track of where those territorial groups are. We got a question here from Ricky as well. Is it possible to apply to get hornbills for a 2,000 hectare private game reserve in the Waterberg? How do your properties get selected in terms of reintroductions, Luce?
In the past, the selections have been because we've been trying to learn how to do it. So we have two national cores. So there's Northern Zululand, and then there's Mabula through to Marikele, to try and link up with the Botswana populations. So if that property falls within that core, absolutely. We did some modeling and we found we need a minimum of 10 groups for those reintroduction populations to be sustainable. So, you know, we're really trying to focus on building these cores, because if we just put isolated groups here and there and they're not connected, you know, they're just doomed to extinction. So it depends where that reserve is, and you're welcome to drop me a line.
Awesome, thanks, Lucy. We've got a question here from Al asking if you know sort of what specific species of trees the birds are preferring to nest in. And I suppose here this would specifically be for Southern Ground-Hornbills.
Yeah, so multiple tree species, but generally species that create soft hollows. So things like figs, baobabs, but then also apple blah, leadwood, old dead leadwoods. Some of the nests that my parents found in '66 are still being used by those resident groups. So if you've got a good old dead leadwood, it can last generations. But generally, it's soft-wooded species that form those hollows.
Brilliant. Yeah, so important to keep those big old trees around. And then also from Al, just asking if any birds have been tagged, or if there's any plans to tag any more birds with GPS or otherwise tracking devices.
All right, so the FITS did a tagging project in the APNR. Unfortunately, those tags led to some mortalities. There was some more tagging and ringing work done in Kruger. We're still trying to find what would be considered a completely safe way of tagging the birds. Also, ring-wise, we use them, absolutely, but we're trying to move away from them. Ground hornbills have ankle structure much like a crane, so you would prefer to ring above the knee joint, but then they've got that great big tendon up the back for stomping around the savannas. So they're not particularly well designed, and you know, so birds do get into trouble from rings. And so what we are redoing from back in the day is actually tattooing the facial skin. It's 15 seconds per side. using a code, and that should last their lifespan and add no further risk to the birds. I think with any kind of tagging or ringing, there's always a risk, and we're just constantly trying to minimize that risk in any of our research.
Absolutely, yeah. We see the same thing with secretary birds, trying to come up with safe ways of IDing individuals that doesn't hamper them too much. But yeah, interesting work with the tattoos, and definitely seems to be one of the less invasive methods. So thanks for trialing that out. We're watching with interest. But Liz, I'm not seeing any other questions coming through at the moment. I think just from my side, once again, a huge thank you to you. Such fascinating work and really groundbreaking stuff, and so exciting that you've pushed beyond the northern boundaries of the southern population into the northern enigmas, as you called them, and all power to you and your team as you continue to grow. So well done. And I don't know if you have any last closing sentiments before we wrap up for tonight.
No, just thank you for the platform again, and thank you as always. I love working with BirdLife, so thank you.
Thanks, Lise. Go well. And we will see everybody back here next time on Conservation Conversations. Really great to have had Dr. Lucy Kemp with us once again. We look forward to yet another exciting webinar with David Allen, all things Knysna and waterbirds, ahead of our Flock to Wilderness talk. So really looking forward to that one. Thank you all for spending your Tuesday night with us. We will be back again on the 16th of May. Thank you all so much. I will leave the room open for a few minutes if you'd like to leave Lucy a message in the chat box. But otherwise, we will see you all in 2 weeks' time. Thanks so much, everybody, and good night.